To the world, my life with Isabelle seemed like a dream. I was a dedicated entrepreneur, and she was a social butterfly who could brighten any room with her grace and wit. We had crafted a lifestyle that others admired, a seemingly perfect balance of career and family. Our two children, Emma and Lucas, were the heart of our household, adding a layer of joy that completed the picture. As they departed for a summer vacation with my parents, Isabelle proposed something unexpected, a getaway for just the two of us. Her proposal came as a surprise. "We need this," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "It'll be a chance to reconnect." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to go, but because her sudden enthusiasm felt rehearsed. Still, I agreed. The truth was, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that the cracks in our relationship were superficial, that this trip could plaster over them. Isabelle threw herself into the planning with an energy that seemed almost frantic. She researched resorts, curated an itinerary, and shopped for a new wardrobe. "Leave it to me," she insisted. "I know exactly what we need." Her confidence was reassuring at first, but the closer we got to our departure date, the more uneasy I felt. Something wasn't right, though I couldn't put my finger on it. On the day of our flight, Isabelle was radiant. Her outfit was impeccable, her smile dazzling, and her demeanor exuded confidence. As we boarded the plane, I pushed my doubts aside. Maybe this was exactly what we needed, a fresh start away from the distractions of daily life. The resort Isabelle had chosen was a marvel of luxury. As our car pulled up to the grand entrance, my breath caught at the sight of the sprawling estate set against a backdrop of turquoise ocean and lush greenery. Isabelle turned to me, her eyes sparkling. "Isn't this perfect?" she asked, her voice brimming with excitement. I nodded, genuinely impressed. "It's beautiful," I said, taking in the polished marble floors, the towering palm trees lining the driveway, and the uniformed staff who greeted us with practiced smiles. Isabelle beamed, clearly pleased with my reaction. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that her enthusiasm was genuine, that this trip might indeed be the reset we both needed. The lobby was a masterpiece of design, with vaulted ceilings and massive glass windows that offered an uninterrupted view of the ocean. The air was cool and fragrant, carrying a subtle hint of tropical flowers. As we checked in, Isabelle leaned into me, her voice low and conspiratorial. "Just wait," she said. "This is going to be unforgettable." Her words, though meant to be reassuring, carried a weight I couldn't quite place. Before I could dwell on it, the sound of laughter interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see three women striding into the lobby, their presence commanding attention. Isabelle lit up and waved them over. "Nathan, you remember Claire, Naomi, and Vivian, don't you?" Isabelle said, her tone casual, as if she were introducing them at a dinner party rather than on what I thought was a romantic getaway. I blinked, momentarily stunned. I vaguely remembered them from one of Isabelle's many social events, but their presence here was unexpected. "What are they doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Isabelle's laugh was light, dismissive. "Oh, I thought it would be fun to have some company. It's always livelier with friends around, don't you think?" Fun? Livelier? These were not words I would have chosen to describe what I had envisioned as a chance to reconnect with my wife. But Isabelle's tone left no room for argument, and before I could say anything, she was already deep in conversation with her friends. As I stood there, feeling more like an accessory than a husband, I noticed the way Isabelle seemed to thrive in their presence. She was animated, her laughter bright and infectious, her gestures sweeping and confident. It was a side of her I hadn't seen in a long time, but it felt distant, as though I were watching a stranger. That evening, the four of them dominated the conversation over dinner. The women shared stories, exchanged gossip, and reveled in their shared experiences, while I sat quietly, an outsider at my own table. Every attempt I made to join the conversation was met with polite indifference or redirected back to Isabelle. It was as though I were invisible, a mere observer to their world. The resort's restaurant was exquisite, its open design offering a stunning view of the ocean under a blanket of stars. The gentle sound of waves provided a soothing backdrop to the lively chatter, but I couldn't enjoy it. My thoughts were consumed by the growing realization that this trip was not what I had been led to believe. Isabelle seemed to sense my mood, but made no effort to address it. Instead, she leaned into the narrative her friends were weaving, the one where she was the star, the one who held everything together. "Nathan's lucky I handle all the details," she said with a laugh. Her friends nodded in agreement, their smiles tinged with a smugness that stung more than I cared to admit. As they continued, the discomfort in my chest only grew. Isabelle laughed with her friends, each exchange reinforcing the image of her as the queen bee of their tight-knit group. Yet I couldn't help but notice the faint undercurrent of competition in their words, a subtle sharpness that belied their camaraderie. Claire, Naomi, and Vivian often praised Isabelle, but their compliments were laced with backhanded remarks that bordered on envy. "You're so lucky, Isabelle," Naomi said, swirling her glass of wine. "Nathan's always working so hard to make all this possible. Most men wouldn't be this accommodating." The word accommodating hung in the air like an accusation. I forced a tight smile but said nothing, refusing to rise to the bait. Isabelle, however, played along, her laughter light and breezy. "Oh, Nathan doesn't mind," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "He knows I have a knack for making things happen." Her casual dismissal stung more than I cared to admit. It wasn't the words themselves, but the implication that my efforts were secondary to her vision of perfection. I sipped my drink, my mind racing with thoughts I wasn't ready to confront. That night, back in our room, Isabelle was unusually quiet. The playful banter she shared with her friends seemed to vanish the moment we were alone. She moved around the suite with practiced efficiency, unpacking her belongings and carefully arranging them as if preparing for a long stay. I watched her from the bed, the silence between us growing heavier by the second. "Why didn't you tell me they were coming?" I finally asked, my voice calm but firm. Isabelle didn't look up from her suitcase. "I thought it would be a nice surprise," she said, her tone measured. "I didn't think it would be a big deal." "It's not exactly what I had in mind when you said this was a trip for us," she sighed, closing her suitcase with a soft thud. "Nathan, you're always so serious. Can't you just relax and enjoy yourself? They won't be around all the time. We'll have our moments." Her words felt like a deflection, a dismissal of the concerns that were beginning to bubble to the surface. But instead of pressing the issue, I nodded, telling myself it wasn't worth the argument. Yet, deep down, I knew this wasn't the last time we'd circle back to this conversation. The next morning, as Isabelle and her friends lounged by the pool, I decided to check on the resort bookings. Something about the arrangements felt off. When I approached the front desk, the receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. "Good morning, Mr. Lewis. How can I assist you?" "I wanted to confirm the details of our reservation," I said. "Specifically, the number of rooms and how they're being billed." The receptionist typed a few keys on her computer before nodding. "Of course. You have 4 rooms booked under your name, all charged to the card on file." My stomach dropped. 4 rooms. I repeated, keeping my voice steady. "Yes, sir. Is there an issue?" I forced a smile. "No, thank you for confirming." As I walked away, my mind raced. Isabelle had arranged this trip under the guise of a romantic getaway, but had effectively turned it into a group vacation at my expense. The realization felt like a slap in the face, and for the first time, I began to see her actions for what they were, selfish and calculated. When I confronted Isabelle about the rooms later that evening, she didn't deny it. "I thought it would be easier to put everything on one card," she said with a shrug. "We'll sort it out later." Her nonchalance only fueled my frustration. "It's not about the money, Isabelle. It's about the fact that you didn't think it was important to tell me." She rolled her eyes, brushing past me to pour herself a glass of wine. "You're overreacting, Nathan. It's just a trip. Relax." Her dismissal cut deeper than I expected. I had always prided myself on being patient, on giving Isabelle the benefit of the doubt. But in that moment, I realized my patience wasn't just a virtue. It was a weakness she had learned to exploit. The next few days were a blur of strained interactions and mounting tensions. Isabelle and her friends continued their lavish indulgences, oblivious to the cracks forming beneath the surface. Meanwhile, I began taking small steps to regain control. I canceled the additional charges on my card, informing the resort staff that I would only be responsible for our original booking. The fallout was immediate. When Isabelle tried to book a private cabana for the group, her request was politely declined. The embarrassment was written all over her face, though she tried to laugh it off in front of her friends. "It's just a mix-up," she said, her voice tight. "I'll sort it out." But the whispers had already begun. Claire and Naomi exchanged knowing glances, their once unwavering loyalty now replaced by thinly veiled skepticism. By the end of the week, Isabelle's carefully curated image was beginning to crumble. Her friends, sensing the shift in dynamics, started to distance themselves. The camaraderie that once defined their group was replaced by subtle jabs and passive-aggressive remarks. One evening, as we sat on the balcony overlooking the ocean, Isabelle finally addressed the growing tension. "Why are you doing this, Nathan?" she asked, her voice trembling with frustration. "Why are you trying to ruin this trip?" "I'm not ruining anything," I replied calmly. "I'm just setting boundaries." Her eyes flashed with anger. "You're punishing me." "No, Isabelle," I said, my voice steady. "I'm holding you accountable." Isabelle's anger simmered, but for once, she didn't have the audience of her friends to back her up. "Boundaries?" she scoffed, crossing her arms. "Since when did you decide to start setting boundaries, Nathan?" I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. "Since you decided this trip wasn't about us. Since you turned our marriage into a performance for your friends. Since you stopped respecting me." She rolled her eyes and turned away, staring out at the ocean. "You're being dramatic. And you're being dishonest," I shot back. "You didn't invite them here for fun. You invited them here to keep up appearances. You knew this wasn't what I wanted, but you didn't care." Her shoulders stiffened at my words, but she didn't respond. Instead, she picked up her glass of wine and walked inside, leaving me alone on the balcony. The sound of the waves was soothing, but it did little to calm the storm raging inside me. The next morning, Isabelle acted as if nothing had happened. She joined her friends at breakfast, laughing and chatting as though the tension of the previous night had never existed. But her mask was slipping, and I could see it in the way her laughter didn't quite reach her eyes. I didn't join them. Instead, I spent the morning walking along the beach, letting the soft sand and crashing waves soothe my nerves. The resort was undeniably beautiful, but it felt hollow now, a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. When I returned to the room, Isabelle was waiting for me. "Nathan, we need to talk," she said, her tone unusually serious. "I'm listening," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. She hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her blouse. "This isn't how I wanted things to go. I thought this trip would be good for us." "Good for us?" I repeated, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "Or good for you?" Her eyes flashed with anger, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "Why does it have to be one or the other?" As Isabelle tried to smooth things over, I realized she wasn't apologizing. She was deflecting. She wasn't willing to admit she had done anything wrong. And in that moment, I knew that this wasn't something we could fix. "I'm done," I said, my voice firm. "I'm not going to keep playing this game." Her smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about us. This marriage. It's not working, Isabelle, and it hasn't been for a long time." For the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "You don't mean that." "I do," I said, standing up. "I've been meaning it for a while." That evening, I made the decision to leave the resort. I packed my bags quietly while Isabelle was out with her friends, my mind racing with the implications of what I was about to do. This wasn't just about the trip. It was about everything that had led us to this point. When Isabelle returned, she found me sitting on the edge of the bed, suitcase by my side. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I'm leaving," I said simply. "I've had enough." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "You're not serious." "I've never been more serious," I said, standing up. "I'll be staying somewhere else for the rest of the trip. When we get home, we'll figure out the next steps." She stared at me, her expression a mix of anger and shock. "You can't just leave." "Watch me," I said, picking up my suitcase and walking out the door. Walking out of that room felt both liberating and terrifying. For years, I had been tethered to Isabelle's world, a life built on appearances and control. Leaving her behind at the resort felt like stepping into the unknown, but it was a step I needed to take. I checked into a modest hotel a few miles away, its simplicity a stark contrast to the opulence of the resort. The quietness of the room allowed me to breathe for the first time in years. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the small window at the setting sun. The silence was heavy but comforting. My phone buzzed repeatedly, calls and messages from Isabelle that I didn't bother to check. I knew what they would say. Accusations, demands, and perhaps a hint of guilt. I turned the phone off, deciding I didn't owe her a response. For the first time, I prioritized my own peace over her expectations. The next day, I called my parents to check on Emma and Lucas. Their laughter echoed through the phone, a bittersweet reminder of why I was doing this. They deserved better. A stable, loving home free from the tension that had defined their parents' marriage. "Everything okay?" my mother asked, her tone tinged with concern. "It will be," I replied, unsure whether I was trying to convince her or myself. I avoided telling her the full story. I didn't want my parents to worry, nor did I want my children to pick up on the strain in our family. For now, it was enough to know they were happy and cared for. Back at the resort, Isabelle's carefully curated facade was beginning to crumble. Without me there to bankroll her indulgences, her friends quickly grew impatient. Claire was the first to voice her frustration. "Isabelle, what's going on? Why are the cards being declined?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Isabelle, ever the actress, tried to brush it off. "It's just a mistake. Nathan must have moved some things around. Claire wasn't buying it. Moved things around or left you to deal with the mess?" The tension in their group was palpable. The camaraderie that had once defined their friendship was now replaced by suspicion and judgment. Meanwhile, I took the first steps toward reclaiming my life. I called my lawyer, an efficient and pragmatic woman named Rachel. "I'm ready to move forward," I told her, my voice steady. "Understood," Rachel said. "We'll start with the financials. Have you canceled her access to the accounts?" "Yes," I confirmed. "She doesn't have access to anything anymore." Rachel paused, her tone softening. "This won't be easy. Nathan, are you prepared for what comes next?" I hesitated but then nodded. "I am." Isabelle's unraveling reached its peak when resort staff approached her about the unpaid bills. The humiliation was evident as she tried to argue her way out of the situation, but her usual charm fell flat. "You don't understand," she insisted, her voice rising. "My husband will handle this." But her confidence was shaky, and the staff wasn't swayed. "Ma'am, without payment, we'll have to involve local authorities." Her friends began to back away, their loyalty evaporating. Naomi muttered something under her breath about not signing up for this, while Claire and Vivian exchanged knowing glances. The cracks in Isabelle's world were now glaringly obvious. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of control over my life. I wasn't being vindictive. I was drawing a line, showing Isabelle that her actions had consequences. As I watched the notifications of declined transactions roll in, I felt no guilt, only relief. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my identity, my dignity, and my future. I had taken enough, and I was finally done letting her. 2 days later, Isabelle received the divorce papers. The resort staff handed her the envelope in the lobby, their professional smiles doing little to mask the judgment in their eyes. She opened the envelope in front of her friends, her face pale as she read the words. "Divorce?" Claire said, her tone laced with disbelief. "Isabelle, what did you expect?" Naomi shook her head, her voice dripping with sarcasm. So much for being the one in control. For once, Isabelle was speechless. The confidence she had wielded like a weapon was gone, replaced by a stunned silence. While Isabelle faced her reckoning, I focused on rebuilding my life with Emma and Lucas. I picked them up from my parents' house, their joy at seeing me a welcome reprieve from the turmoil. "Dad, are we going home now?" Emma asked, her eyes bright with excitement. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, hugging her tightly. "We're going home." I knew the conversation about the divorce would come soon, but for now, I let them bask in the simplicity of being a family again. Telling Emma and Lucas about the divorce was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The night we got home, I gathered them in the living room, sitting on the couch between them. They were still buzzing with energy from their trip with my parents, their laughter filling the room like sunlight. "Hey, guys," I started, my voice steady but soft. "There's something important we need to talk about." Emma's smile faltered as she picked up on my serious tone. Lucas, ever observant, tilted his head, his young mind already trying to piece together what I was about to say. "Is everything okay, Dad?" he asked. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "It will be, buddy, but things are going to change. Your mom and we've decided we won't be living together anymore." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "You mean you're getting a divorce?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Yes," I said gently. "We've had problems for a while, and this is the best decision for everyone. But I want you to know that it doesn't change how much we both love you." The days that followed were a mix of sadness and adjustment. Emma, being older, struggled more openly, her questions often laced with anger and confusion. "Why couldn't you fix things?" she asked one evening, her eyes red from crying. I knelt down, meeting her gaze. "Sometimes people grow apart," I explained. "It doesn't mean we didn't try or that we don't care about each other, but staying together when we're unhappy wouldn't be fair to anyone, especially you and Lucas." Lucas, on the other hand, internalized everything. He threw himself into his schoolwork and hobbies, his silence speaking louder than words. I made it my mission to be there for both of them, ensuring they felt loved and supported, even as our family dynamic shifted. While I focused on the kids, Isabelle's world continued to unravel. Word of our divorce spread quickly through her social circles, fueled by whispers about her behavior at the resort. The friends who once flocked to her now avoided her calls, their loyalty vanishing as her image of power and control crumbled. Her brother, Caleb, reluctantly took her in. "She's a wreck, Nathan," he told me during one of his many venting calls. "She refuses to take responsibility for anything. She's blaming you, the resort staff, hell, even me." I sighed, feeling a pang of sympathy despite everything. "She'll have to figure it out, Caleb. I can't help her anymore." Without Isabelle's constant demands, I rediscovered parts of myself I had forgotten. I started running again, something I hadn't done since college. The early morning jogs became my therapy, the rhythmic sound of my feet hitting the pavement a reminder that I was moving forward, step by step. I also reconnected with old friends, people Isabelle had quietly edged out of my life over the years. We met for drinks, reminiscing about simpler times. It felt good to laugh again, to feel like I was part of something outside the confines of my marriage. One evening, while attending a charity event organized by a colleague, I met Sophie. She was warm and unassuming, a stark contrast to the socialites I had grown accustomed to through Isabelle. We struck up a conversation, and for the first time in years, I felt a genuine connection. Sophie didn't ask about my career or my social standing. She asked about my favorite books, the places I wanted to visit, and my thoughts on the future. Her curiosity was refreshing, her laughter infectious. By the end of the evening, I found myself smiling in a way I hadn't in years. Isabelle's first attempt to reconnect came a few weeks after our divorce was finalized. She called me late one evening, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "Nathan," she began, I wanted to say I'm sorry." Her words caught me off guard. For years, I had waited for an apology that never came, and now, when I had finally moved on, there it was. "I appreciate that," I said carefully, keeping my tone neutral. "I didn't realize how much I depended on you," she continued, her voice breaking. "I took you for granted. I don't know how to fix this." "There's nothing to fix, Isabelle," I said gently. "We're not going back to the way things were, but I hope you can find a way forward for yourself and for the kids." Introducing Sophie to Emma and Lucas was a decision I didn't take lightly. I waited until I was sure our relationship was serious, knowing how much it would mean to them. When the day finally came, I was a bundle of nerves. Sophie, however, was a natural. She engaged Emma in a discussion about her favorite books and helped Lucas build a model rocket. By the end of the evening, the kids were laughing and chatting with her as if they'd known her for years. Later, As we cleaned up after dinner, Sophie turned to me with a smile. "You've raised amazing kids, Nathan." Her words filled me with a sense of pride and gratitude. For the first time, I felt like I was building a life that was truly my own. Isabelle's journey was slower, more painful. She eventually found a job at a local boutique, a far cry from the glamorous lifestyle she once led. It was humbling work, but it gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She also made an effort to rebuild her relationship with Emma and Lucas. She attended their school events, called them regularly, and tried to show up in ways she hadn't before. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. One sunny afternoon, I sat on the porch with Sophie, watching Emma and Lucas play in the yard. The sound of their laughter filled the air, a reminder of how far we had come. Sophie's hand rested lightly on mine, her presence a quiet comfort. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. The road to this moment had been long and painful, but it had led me here, to a life filled with love, hope, and possibility. And that, I realized, was enough.